Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Once Upon a Crime. This week, we'll wrap up the series Buried Family Secrets with a very special episode and one that I think my listeners will find fascinating. In early 1974, women began going missing in Washington state. By the fall, over a dozen women had been abducted, raped, and strangled, their bodies taken to remote areas, some never to be discovered. More cases of missing and murdered women were recorded in Utah and Colorado, before one man on investigators' possible suspects list was arrested on unrelated charges. He would eventually be suspected of over 30 murders and tried and convicted for 2, paying for his crimes in a Florida electric chair at the age of 42. The name Ted Bundy would become synonymous with the term serial killer, and his infamy long outlasted his life. Even today, over 3 decades later, movies, documentaries, books, and podcasts are dedicated to his story. But before Ted Bundy became a collective symbol of a real-life boogeyman, he was a son, a brother, a grandson, a cousin, someone with friends and family members who loved him and never could have suspected the evil that lay within him and would come to destroy so many lives. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with one of those family members, someone who grew up with Ted Bundy and with whom she shared a close relationship. Edna Cowell Martin knew Bundy as Cousin Ted. Having to face the horror of what her cousin had done and the chaos of the media circus surrounding his arrests, trial, and execution, Edna and her family chose to remain anonymous, until now. Edna began searching her memories of growing up with Ted Bundy for signs she may have missed about the dark side of the man she thought she knew. She shared that journey and what she discovered about Ted Bundy and herself in her new book, Dark Tide: Growing Up with Ted Bundy. As someone who learned about Bundy as a young adult and who followed the case soon after he was captured in Florida in 1978, the book revealed to me a side of the story that's never been told before. Edna tells her story with heart and courage, and I know readers will learn some surprising details, even if, like me, they think they know a lot about Bundy's crimes. Here is my conversation with Edna Cowell Martin, the author of Dark Tide: Growing Up with Ted Bundy. Okay, so Edna, I just want to welcome you to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today. And I first of all just want to say that I loved the book. I mean, I devoured it in like a day. So, and that is not normal for me because I have a lot of other things that there's so many things that come at you at once, especially when you're working on research and things like that. But I really couldn't put it down. And I wanted just to say that I really admired the heart in it and also the courage that you had in telling this story, because it definitely took a lot of years for you to come to this conclusion and to write this book. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I just want to say, stop gushing, Esther. Hello, Edna.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So it was really evident to me. So there's a lot in this book that I was surprised about. Things that I think that a lot of my listeners, even if they think they know this story or, who Ted Bundy was from what they've seen in the media, will have a lot of kind of revelations. And we'll talk about some of those as we go. But first thing I wanted to say was that it's evident from the very first pages that you were raised in this really loving, warm, wonderful family with wonderful parents, close relationships with extended family. I mean, I just wanted to be part of your family as I read this book. It just seemed like a wonderful upbringing. So I wanted you, first of all, to give listeners kind of a feel for what it was like growing up with your parents and your family, just so they, first of all, get an overall sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a musician. He was a concert pianist, a composer, a conductor, but mainly a concert pianist and a professor. But his younger years, he did a lot of things to try to get, some recognition as a concert pianist. So he was playing a lot of concerts. And so when I was in grade school, he was touring a lot. So we live in the Seattle area, but we would go to New York City and he'd play concerts there. And then we spent a couple years in Europe and he played all around there. And when you're a kid, it's just what it is. In retrospect, I look back and go, oh gosh, that was pretty cool. But my parents were just really nice people, and very considerate and just fun to be around. And my dad was also very athletic, so he wasn't just this guy buried in his in his studio playing his piano. He was a real fun guy to be around too.
Yeah, and it seemed like there was always a lot of people around, family and friends who would come and visit, or you guys would travel and meet with people and things like that. But also, it just seemed like it was kind of an elevated normal family, I want to say, because there was just so much love and so much, like I said, extended family, and Ted was part of that family.
Great. Yeah. So my parents and his parents grew up in the Philadelphia area. And so Ted is from my father's side of the family. And my dad is the youngest of seven kids. So his very oldest sibling, which was a brother named Samuel Cowell, had three daughters. And one of those daughters was Ted's mother, Louise. And so they grew up in the Philadelphia area, as did my dad and my mom. And so my dad was really close to Louise growing up. She was 4 years younger than he was, even though she was actually his niece. So they grew up. And so when my parents moved out to Washington State, kind of to follow my mom's family, my dad wrote her a letter urging her to move out to the Pacific Northwest because she had had a child, and that child was born out of wedlock. Back then that was a real stigma to have a child with no father around. So she was considered an unwed mother, and she called him Teddy. Was getting, to where he was 4 years old. He was starting to ask questions, and she was starting to worry about what was going to happen when he wanted to know about his family. And quite frankly, people around all knew that she was an unwed mother. She had to go to a home for unwed mothers up in, one of those Northeast states to have her son. So my dad urged her to come out. They moved out to the state of Washington, moved in with our family, and lived with us almost a year. This was a year before I was born. Mm. So we were the only family members that they had on the West Coast. So naturally, we would gravitate towards each other and celebrate fun things together, picnics, family events. So we grew up with the Bundy family around quite often, except when we were traveling. And then we would come back and get together again. And eventually we moved away, my mom, my dad, and I, because my dad got a job at another state at the University of Arkansas as the chairman of the music department there, professor and chairman. So that was a big move for me. Mm-hmm. Leaving the Pacific Northwest and going to Arkansas. So we got a separation at that point.
Yeah, that was quite a very different environment, number one, from Arkansas.
It turned out to be really cool, beautiful part of the country in the Ozark Mountains. So it was great once I acclimated, and because I really missed the Pacific Northwest. But fortunately, I was able to come out every summer and visit. But man, that was a different world. And I made some great friends, and it was great.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I think was a surprise to me, maybe a little bit of a surprise to me, was that a lot of times when we read these memoirs about these, the people that are, somehow connected to these cases or these, these things from the past, a lot of times I realize when I read them, it's like, yeah, they were connected, but not that connected. You know what I mean? It was like, so I think it's, first of all, easier for them to tell the story because they're a little bit removed from it, even though they are maybe related to somebody in that in that case or something. But this is very different because you were very close to him. You were cousins. You said he was almost like a sibling, and that's what it seems like as I read these stories about your life together. Even when you're in Arkansas, but you come back, I think he might have went out and visited you once there. I don't remember.
On his way through, he was on his way through to try to discover who his biological father was, because he did not know, and that I think really was something that bothered him.
Mhm.
So he stopped by to visit us on the way to Philadelphia so that
Right.
he could see if he could find out. But we really
Yeah.
became close. I mean, he was 5 years older than I was. So when we were doing our family get-togethers and stuff, he was one of the big kids. And so I
Mhm.
kind of looked up to him, but I was closer maybe to his younger siblings during that time. But when I moved back to Seattle, that's when we really became close
Mhm.
because I only lived, I was came back to finish up at the University of Washington my
Yes.
junior and senior year. So I got an apartment just 5 or 6 blocks from him. And so
Mhm.
that's when I really started seeing him a lot. And he
Yes.
made a big
That
effort.
part,
Yeah.
yeah. And that part of the story too was also very surprising to me because I'm like, that was, the area which people know about from this case. University of Washington. This is where, women started going missing
Mhm.
and all of that. And you lived in that neighborhood. He lived in that neighborhood. And it was all basically at the same time
Yeah.
that this was going on. Of course, unbeknownst to anybody who knew him in any capacity to think that that he would at all be involved. And that's the thing that again is so chilling about this story is because we see these parallels of what's happening, just normal life, day-to-day life,
Right.
going to school and having friends and having, get-togethers with these young adults,
Yeah,
and here's Ted
exactly.
Bundy as just one of the normal part of the group, and nobody's,
Was.
yeah,
Yeah.
nothing out
I
of the
mean,
ordinary. Mm-hmm.
yeah, he loved to drop by. He loved hanging out with my girlfriends and me. He loved being the center of attention. So we were these scruffy college kids, with long hair and jeans and, we were all broke, just, just kind of living hand to mouth. And he actually had jobs. I mean, he had all these really interesting things that he was doing. He was on this path for success. And that's what's so, you kind of part of me mourns the loss of his potential too. I mean, he was really seemed to be on his way to do stuff where he'd worked on a re-election campaign for the governor, was undercover, in the enemy, not the enemy, but the opposition camp to find out the
Mm-hmm.
scoop on uh, Governor Evans' opponent. He was on the Seattle Crime Commission. He was going to law school. He had just gotten back from Stanford where he was studying Mandarin. And that was really forward thinking because we were just had that sort of entente with China where we had started creating a relationship with that country, which we really hadn't had before. I mean, he could have gone far with that. There were so many things he was doing. So when he would come over, he would tell us all these stories about what he was doing. And we were just sort of in awe of this guy. And so he would come into my apartment with nice clothes on and a shoulder, sweater wrapped around his shoulders and looked very preppy. And we were just
Mm-hmm.
going, oh man, he's so different from us. And here's what he's doing. This is what it looks like 5 years from now, because he
Mm-hmm.
was 5 years older, as I mentioned. And he loved the attention. He loved being the center of attention and all of us sort of being in awe of his accomplishments, I must say. He did like
Right.
that.
Yeah. And we'll see later on in the book, you have these scenes that, again, are one of these things that are kind of jaw dropping, like how he was behaving after, he had been arrested, of course, still denying that he had anything to do with these crimes. But that is that, and I don't want to give too much of that away because I think that's just a part of the book that I know nobody has heard these stories before. I don't want to take that away from the reader so they can, when they read it, they'll really get a sense of that because believe me, I read that through those a couple of times. Like, wait a minute, hold on,
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
what happened?
I had come back from Alaska and wanted to take that opportunity because I'd gotten a phone call up there that
Mhm.
he'd been arrested. And it just absolutely, I even have chills right now. And I've talked about this quite a bit. It still gives me chills. The reaction I had when I got that ship to shore phone call up on the bridge of the processing ship where I was working out in the remote Dutch harbor. And I was so shocked and so blown away that my cousin was being arrested for the, you know, attempted kidnapping of a young woman in Utah. because he had moved to Utah. So interestingly enough, all the murders and abductions had stopped in the state of Washington. Of course, we never made that, you know, that connection that
Right.
they stopped in Washington and started up in Utah. So we
Mhm.
didn't realize that the two things were connected. I mean, jurisdictions didn't share information. We didn't hear about news from Utah very much.
Right.
I mean, that was just a completely different world, no social media.
Right.
And nothing, believe me, reached me in Alaska. That was completely in the end of the world up there.
Mhm.
But when I got back, I wanted to ask him myself. And that's, I
Yeah,
think,
because
what you're referring to.
that's something, yeah, that's something that also, how do you even make sense of that? Like you said, knowing somebody in this way and
Yeah.
then finding out that they were accused of it'd be something like somebody who, maybe it's your father or, your brother, and you're like, you love them, you think they're a great person, and
Yeah.
then they're accused of something so terrible. You're like, wait,
Mhm.
that cannot be true. And I wanted to bring up one of the quotes in the book that you wrote this quote, how does a mind process something like this? Reassigning an adored cousin to one of the most well-known serial killers of the 20th century. And this, of course, is later on once, there's more accusations and more things that are tying him to these crimes. And now everybody's having to grapple with that. So how did that process go for you to go from no way, kind of feeling this cannot be true, this is a mistake, to wait a minute, now I need to ask him, did he do this?
Right.
What did that process like?
Well, when somebody's arrested, you go, well, gosh, there must be a reason why they're arrested, but maybe he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. My brother and I were starting to put our heads together and wonder if maybe he was, doing some burglary or something. I mean, because my brother John had stopped by his rooming house, and Ted wouldn't let us in his place. That was what the weird thing was, because he would come over all the time to my place. He'd show up with a bag of groceries, which we welcomed, of course. But one time I remember I just tried it one time. I stopped by his place, knocked on his door. He kind of opened the door, stuck his head out and said, no, it's not a good time to come in here. And he stepped outside and talked to me and tried to tell me that it was a mess inside or something like that. But I never was allowed inside his place. So things started to make us wonder what was going on. And the one time that John went in there, he saw stuff that he wondered if Ted had stolen, because it was a bunch of things like snow skis or amps for stereos and things. Why would people need multiple versions of any of those things? And I think Ted skied, so it wouldn't be unusual that he had snow skis, but to have a bunch of them like that. So that's what we thought at first. So going from complete denial because the person that we knew wasn't anything like the person that we were being presented as, this criminal and much worse that might attack females. It was a process for all of us, not just me, but all the way up to, again, the governor of the state of Washington, who wrote him a letter of recommendation, the political reporter that became friends with him during the campaign and afterwards. None of us could accept it, professors, friends, relatives, because we only got to see one side of Ted. And now looking back, I realized that he was very good at being completely different people with the families and friends, excuse me, that he knew, as opposed to these people, obviously, that he was attacking. So we only saw that side of him. We only saw the mask that he was wearing. So for me, it was a step-by-step process. But I got back from Alaska and I still felt that I wanted to ask him about what was going on, because he had spent time in a jail in Salt Lake City. And I wanted to get his take on it. I mean, everybody deserves to have their side heard.
Right.
And that's what my plan was, is that I in no way thought that he was at that point anything like a serial killer. Otherwise, I don't think I would have spent time alone with him like I did.
Right. And the thing too I was gonna mention is that the fact of when there was all of these stories going around and started to become known that there was these girls that were being found, either they disappeared or they're found murdered. And this was right in your neighborhood. This is where you were living.
Yes. So there were 8 women who were attacked. 7 out of 8 of them, I think, were abducted and murdered, violently attacked, abducted and murdered. One of them that lived right across the street from me and around the corner, just a couple blocks from me, was the first one. And she was, her name was Karen Sparks, I believe, Epley.
Right.
She was
Mm-hmm.
she was attacked, but and left for dead. She survived, not without a lot of, you know,
Trauma and damage.
yeah, trauma and disabilities from that attack. I think somebody interrupted it. There was a sound that sounded like somebody was coming in or something. And luckily for her, he left her. But he would, when he walked from his house, he would have to walk by my apartment and then just walk around the corner to get to her place. And then the other 3 that he abducted were just within walking distance of where I lived, maybe 10 minutes. So
Right.
we were terrified. Things were starting to happen right where we lived, and it changed everything. It used to be that we all would hitchhike different places, if you can believe that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't even believe it to this day that I did
Yeah.
that.
Right.
They get to the entrance to the freeway, and there'd be about 50 kids, college students, with their thumbs out.
No, we
Girls.
can't even imagine that now.
Oh,
Can't even.
no. And this would be girls and boys. I mean, young men and young women doing this. And, it was, and after these things started happening, boom, nobody hitchhiked.
Right.
Overnight, that stopped.
Mm-hmm.
We would team up with other people to walk to campus because we didn't want to walk alone.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know, I was walking right by his place on my way.
And he was in
Because,
your place.
yeah, he was
Yeah.
in my place. I mean, here's the irony of all of that is that I actually felt safer knowing he was just within a 6 or 7 minute walk from my apartment. So that if I ever needed anything, my big cousin was there. And my
Right.
parents, who were still in Arkansas at that time, they loved knowing that Ted was nearby, especially when things started happening. And my
Right.
brother was in Seattle as well, but he was like a 20-minute bus ride away. So Ted was right there. And of course, we asked him, we compared notes and talked about it. I mean, this was, again, as a guy that worked on the crime commission and written a pamphlet on rape prevention for women, you know.
Well, yeah.
Well, Esther, I mean, this was during the time that the women's movement was just starting, and it was a big deal, and we were all feeling our oats, and we're really excited about some of the changes that were starting to happen. And I just, psychologically, I don't know how that affected some men, at that time. I have no
Yeah.
idea. Imagine.
There seemed to be a lot going, but yeah, the fact that, you were college students, this was happening to college students, all of this, it was the same, neighborhood, uh,
Mhm.
women and girls about the ages of you and your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, that had to be terrifying. And then, fast forward to finding out this, wait a minute, again, this process had to be so, so difficult. And I'd imagine it would have to take a lot of time to even like really wrap your mind about it, even when you yourself believed, okay, yeah, I believe that he did this.
Mhm.
I would imagine you still kind of vacillate between, well, but did he? Like, can I really believe that?
Yeah, you didn't want to accept it. It was a step by painful step, along the going up the stairs of realization, just fighting it every step of the way, just going, gosh, no, could it be a terrible case of mistaken identity? Could these, we saw these composite sketches that had been drawn of this person who was named Ted, who attacked the 2 young women out in Lake Sammamish, just east of Seattle.
Right.
And we rushed to get the paper and look at the composite sketches. And we were sort of relieved because they really didn't look like him. Now, his girlfriend, Liz, thought they did. but we didn't think they looked like him at all. So, it's just,
We even had a conversation about the
yeah,
picture. You kind of joked about it, right?
yeah, he came over. So he pulls up and we look out the window and there's his little, tan V dub. And this would have been in July of 1975. And we go, oh, good, Ted's here. And my boyfriend of the time, who's been my husband now for 47 years, he was over. And we said, oh, good, we can ask him about this. This must be awful for him. We felt sorry for him that he
Yeah,
was, can you believe it?
yeah,
And so he
yeah.
comes in and he's, all good natured. And Don thrusts it in his face and jokingly says, hey, this looks just like you, Ted. And Don was joking, but Ted goes, oh, I know, but it's a terrible thing that went on. And I'm happy to, by the way, I've been interviewed by the police and we were just like, oh my gosh, we felt so badly that he
Mhm.
had to go through this. And he goes, no, I really want to help out, anything that can help. And then he conveniently had some statistics because back then there were VW bugs were everywhere. There
Mhm.
were everywhere you looked, there was somebody driving a VW bug. It was a really popular, little inexpensive car to get. And so I think at that time, because I looked it up when I wrote this book with my writing partner, Megan Atkinson, we were researching everything and we discovered there were about 40,000 VW bugs registered in the state of Washington, so there
Well,
were a lot of them. And there
which
were a
is maybe
number of, yeah,
one of the reasons he picked that make model car, because it was so common. It wasn't going to stick out anywhere.
I think he had it. Yeah, I've never thought of that,
Mhm.
Esther. I really haven't. That's an
Well, you're
interesting,
not going to pick a bright red sports car that nobody else
yeah,
has, right? Yeah,
that's
I
a
mean, I
that's
just
a
thought of
really
that too.
interesting, yeah. That's a
Yeah.
very interesting theory. Nobody's ever suggested that before, but I don't know. He was pretty calculating. I mean,
Yeah,
anything is possible.
right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And having researched a lot of different perpetrators over the last 8 years, doing this podcast, I do realize that the ones that are, I hate to say that, most successful at this,
Right.
um, they are very good at learning how to basically kind of fly under the radar, like
Yeah.
not have a lot of attention. But this is the funny thing about him, because on the one hand, he was able to blend in because he seemed so normal but on the other hand, he did want attention, just
He
a different
really,
kind of attention, right?
yeah, he really did. He really enjoyed having attention and he handled it really well. I mean, because we would ooh and ah over what stories he had to tell, and he loved that. He really did like attention a lot.
Yeah,
And maybe this getting attention for all these crimes, he started seeing that there are a lot of people paying attention to it. And
right.
he seemed to
Yeah.
be quite cheerful about the fact that he was being interviewed by the police. It didn't seem
Yeah.
to bother him at all.
Yeah, that was the part that also surprised me. Is just his attitude about the fact that when people, even though he was still denying it, denied it up, until the very end, pretty much, he, he was able to, he still kind of like he wasn't angry about being arrested. He wasn't upset or like, any of that. It just seemed like, oh yeah, cool. Like, look at me. I'm Ted, kind of. I was like,
Right.
what?
All the wrong reactions for somebody. I mean, all of those things started, waving a red flag to me. And,
Mhm.
because I kept thinking, even though I was just a young person, I thought, would you say that if you were innocent or if you were wrongly arrested and you were being accused of horrendously heinous crimes,
Mhm.
awful, awful things? Wouldn't you be just completely beleaguered and,
Yeah.
you know,
Completely backpedaling from it, not trying to
yes,
get into the limelight, with
yeah,
it.
exactly. And
Hmm.
he was charming and outgoing and always had a big smile on his face. And he really disarmed people easily, because he was so friendly. And unfortunately, he used that charm and friendliness and, you know, completely, making people feel at ease around him to his, for evil purposes.
Right. Yeah. Was able to, yeah, I mean, just the kind of things that he did, using, your family, your brother and other people,
Yeah.
almost making them like part of his story in a way, but of course them not knowing this at all, like them being
Right.
completely clueless of it until years later. And it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like he wanted me to take him to this place, or and that was, now it turns out that's part of this case of what he was doing,
Yeah.
those kind of things. And that's to me
Yeah.
was
What he did to
very,
my brother, exactly.
yes, it's just
It's
amazing.
it is. And my brother is a very sensitive guy. Um, and he really grew up with Ted. I mean, they were the same exact age. And when this all happened, and we finally just, said, "Oh my God," we both realized he did it, because you'd start talking and comparing notes. Um, he was so um, traumatized by Ted. I
Mhm.
mean, we all were, but my brother was so traumatized by what had happened that he actually left the state and changed his name.
Wow. Yeah.
He's never moved back since then. He just
Yeah.
was
And that's
so.
one of the things I wanted to talk about. So I want to you switch a little bit and talk a little bit more about you, as at writing this book. And so one of the things I wanted to ask, the family, pretty much like you said, your brother, you took it to this level, and who could blame him? But all of you tried to stay anonymous, especially after, all this came out. And I mean, the media focus was huge
It
on this
was.
case, to the point where something we'd probably never seen before, at that time. So staying anonymous all this time, and you did. I mean, I don't know that anybody's heard of your name before now, really. So what made you take the step of wanting now to write this story and put it out there publicly, so people will know exactly who you are, your family, that you were related to Ted Bundy?
Right. Why would I do that? Uh, that is a question I ask myself a lot. I mean, it has been almost 50 years, so I waited a long time. But it occurred to me that I had a story to tell, and I felt like the family, nobody had really sat down from the family's point of view, understandably so, to tell what it was like being a family member of Ted Bundy. And when I first started thinking about doing this project, I had turned 70. And I have to tell you, turning 70 is kind of a big deal. You think you're really a young person until you turn 70, at least in my mind. And you realize that you're not immortal, that you may not be around to tell the story. Having been a history major, I truly believe that this, as much as I don't like being part of this particular historical event, that this is part of history, and I wanted to tell our side of the story. And also, I needed to get it out of my system. I had hidden it for so long that I realized that's not healthy to keep things like this under wraps, things that are traumatic. It was traumatic for us. Nothing compared to what the families went through. That's a whole other level of trauma. And even his immediate siblings, I mean, that's way more trauma for them as well. But it was still trauma for us too, because it was such a shocking and horrific thing to realize that somebody you trusted was the opposite of what you ever thought they were. And it made it so you had doubts about your willing to judge people. Um, it changed the way I looked at people. If I met somebody, especially men, unfortunately, thank God I already had Dawn in my life. But you couldn't help it but wonder if there was something else behind there. So I felt like it was important to tell my story. And I also thought about the families a lot too, and how some of these young women's remains have never been found yet to this day. And those families haven't had a chance to put those, their daughters to rest, or their sisters to rest. It just, that still bothers me a lot for them. So I
Mhm.
just didn't want it to die for their sake. And also I want to be able to shed a light on what
Mhm.
it's like to be related to someone like that.
Did you feel the need to like kind of get a consensus from the family whether this was
Oh yeah.
something okay to do at this time?
Hmm. I did. I talked to everybody, and most everybody at first was not happy about it.
Yeah.
Um, their first reaction was, oh my gosh, let's just keep this the way it is right now. And I can't blame them for that. But I said, this is something that has really been stewing inside of me for a long time. And I really feel like I need to get it out of me. I need to shed light on the story. And one by one, they came around and
Mhm.
have been very supportive.
So, what do you think? What was the most challenging part of writing the book, and what maybe has been the most helpful to you in having completed this project?
Well, it's a big subject, and it's very important before you even start something like this that you do a lot of research because you want to get the facts right. And I knew about my part of the story, but I had gone to a great deal of energy to avoid watching or looking at anything or reading anything about Ted Bundy pretty much all my life. And whereas I know that true crime is an immensely popular genre, I did everything I could to avoid it because of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to take an about face and read everything I could find on him, watch all the different, series and movies on him. I read a bunch of different books. I watched a lot of stuff, but I could only do it in the morning. So I would get up and I would watch, one of the series on TED in the morning because I wanted the rest of the day to recover. I was hoping I could sleep at night after doing that because I found out about what he did in detail that was so violent and cruel that it was, and these were details I had really avoided learning about, and I was forced to face up to it, and it was pretty awful. So that was the hard part about it, but it was necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and I also, had done a lot of just writing for myself and things like that. But I thought, well, taking on a big project like this, I would like to do it with a co-writer. And that's how I teamed up with Megan Atkinson, who is a screenwriter for Sony, Netflix, Nickelodeon, Disney. She's a very talented writer. And the two of us just hit it off. It was a great partnership. And working with someone like that, she brought out a lot of memories because she would ask questions. And I go, oh gosh, I forgot about that. And my husband remembered a lot of things. And fortunately, I have a really good memory for dates. So that
Mm-hmm.
worked out well. And then I had all those letters. I had letters from
Right.
Ted, and I had letters from my parents writing about it, my brother writing about it. So I had a lot of ephemera that I could go back and grab onto and check for details.
Mm-hmm. Those letters are, I mean, those are very fascinating to me because especially when we get to read the letters that he wrote, because
Yeah.
to me, language is so telling, even when people think that they're, that they're being very careful with their words, but they're still, if you study human psychology, there are things that really flash, out at you as you're reading this. You're like, wow, he
I
really
know.
is just a chameleon. I
You,
mean, and he is so good at deflecting and denying
yes.
and
Yes.
it's I mean almost to like expert level, that's something that we don't often see. So
Yeah.
those are very, very I guess just very revealing as to what you were dealing with when you were trying to get him
Yeah.
to tell you something or to admit something, or
Mhm.
and you really, it seemed like you were doing it of course for the victims' families, but also for him. You
Yeah.
thought you
Yes.
need to get help, you need this. And just his way of coming back at you was just so, I could imagine, so frustrating.
Yeah. It was really frustrating. It might seem naive to think that you could have any influence on someone like that. But I thought, well, we had this relationship. Why not try? And I
Mhm.
waited a long time before I wrote him those letters. It was 1986, and he had just gotten the death penalty.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, hey, this is the time to do it. You're going to die. I was pretty, I was
Yeah.
pretty brutal about it. I said, you're going to die. There is no way out for you. And this may be your chance at redemption and to do something for the families. Finally, I mean, give them some information. And then he completely, wrote back on, you need to calm down. You need to get to know yourself before you know me. And it was very patronizing. He quoted
Very.
scripture of all things,
Yeah.
I mean, how insulting to
Yeah.
the, you know,
That was
I
amazing.
was, and he denied a lot of things in those letters.
Right. Yeah. And the way he tries to turn it back on you, like you're the one who has
One with the
problems.
problem. Yes. I'm the one for the problem. I'm all hung up on the past.
Hung up on the past, man. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I
Like,
said,
yeah,
you,
I was
you can't
amazed.
get away from the past, Mr. Bundy.
Yeah. And
The,
you told them that too. You're like, you can say this, but you did this, and
you did it.
no, he wouldn't, no. And he also didn't, there was some very quick kind of moments in the letters where you could see he was a little angry, like he would show it a little bit,
Yes.
but then he'd go right back to I'm Mr. Smooth here,
Yeah,
right? It was
that's right.
fascinating. It really was. But yeah, just that exchange. I mean, is something that I think people will get a lot out of. Just
Yeah.
again, looking at the mindset of a perpetrator who has become so, well versed in this way of being that they
Mm-hmm.
don't see that they're not responding the way normal human beings would.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just,
That's what
mhm,
makes it so hard for the rest of us
right.
because he's responds in a way that we're not familiar with. It's foreign to us.
Mhm,
And that really throws us off our mark completely because
right.
we wouldn't respond that way.
Yeah.
And he was very talented at lying, and making up a whole a whole scenario about himself.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
I
That he
don't
probably
know.
believed, or at least, there was something about that he embodied in his own mind that this is what I am,
Yeah,
even knowing, the reality, which is,
yeah. I
it's
mean,
amazing the way the mind works like that.
it's amazing. I am no match for Ted Bundy.
Mhm.
And I just feel that if I had been one of those young women and this friendly guy asked me for a hand, and oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
he the thing that really gets to me too, right, especially at the beginning, was that his victims were women who wanted to help him,
Hmm.
who offered
Yeah.
to lend a hand.
Mhm. Right.
These were
Yeah.
kind, considerate people
Yeah. That he
with
preyed
good
upon.
hearts.
Right.
Yeah,
Hmm. Right. It's, yeah, it's just, it's really tragic. This is,
really
it's because
awful.
again, you don't expect, this is something you don't expect. You think, okay, well, somebody
Right.
needs help. I'm a nice person. Let me help them. Even if you
Yeah.
get this tingle, like, I don't know, you say, well, I don't want to be insulting or something. And that's
Right.
one of the things we talk about, as far as one of the things that, hopefully people that pay attention in true crime will learn is to pay attention to that little warning bell that goes off for you. Don't, it doesn't matter if you're wrong, do
That's
it
right.
anyway, get out of there, make an excuse, whatever you have to do, because rather
Mhm.
that than, rather be embarrassed than, nobody finds you ever again or something
So
horrible happens.
true. So
Mm-hmm.
true. And another, other things that I've learned too is that people can be multiple things. And that, my mantra after that was trust, but don't be deceived. Who is this person? Sort of question things.
Right. Yeah.
Just don't assume, just don't immediately assume that the way they are superficially.
Right.
And, even to this day, because I'm an avid walker and I walk a lot in places where there's nobody around, but I'm always checking. I never wear ear pods. I
Mm-hmm.
never block out that sense. I'm always checking my surroundings everywhere, sweeping back
Yeah.
and forth, checking behind me when I walk. I carry, pepper spray with me. It just gives
Yeah.
me, comfort knowing I have it. I've never had to use it. Um, but
Yes.
I've many times walked up behind young women and who have, they're listening to something on, ebooks or something audible. And I say hi and they can't hear me. They don't hear me. And I'm
Yeah.
right up behind them. And finally I get their attention. They kind of pull it out and they're a little bit irritated. And I can't help myself. I said, you what? You did not hear me coming up behind me. And it's just
Mhm.
a lucky thing that I don't
Not
have
some.
ill will.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to suggest to every woman out there who's out walking around that don't block out both of your ears.
I always only wear one. I don't, as a matter of fact,
Yeah,
most of the time I don't even know what the other one is. It's like,
yeah.
oh,
I mean, I would suggest not even doing it at all. Just
yeah,
enjoy
exactly.
nature and listen. Be aware of your surroundings. Enjoy yourself. But don't block out one of your primary senses that could save your life.
Yeah. And there's another thing too that you said that comes to mind because of what you just said was the fact that trust but don't be deceived. And especially in today with social media, people can put out this persona of who they are.
Yes,
It's not who they are.
right.
You think, oh, well, they seem like this kind of person, but it's just, yeah, it's one of these things now that you really do have to kind of do your due diligence
A
anytime
lot
you meet
more
somebody.
these days. Yeah, it's so true. It is much
Right.
more. There's it's there's much more risk today.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to last question I wanted to ask you because this would be very specific to you, is that what would be the best advice you would give somebody if they find out like they do with like maybe they find out with you when they discover that like for in your case you're related to Ted Bundy, but I'm thinking about this on a broader scale too. Like if somebody finds out or somebody shares with them that they are in somehow connected to a violent crime or maybe they've been something or somebody in their family just because I'm sure you got a lot of strange responses when people you tell the story at the end of the book of your daughter telling people when she was in college age or a young adult,
Mhm.
and so yeah, you don't know what to expect, and I'm sure it runs the gamut from people being very kind to people being very, like, I don't know, tone deaf about things. But it's hard to know, I would imagine, for most people because they don't have the experience, thankfully. How do you respond to somebody who was a victim or had a family member who's a victim or somehow connected to something that's this violent crime? What would you say would be helpful?
Yeah, well, Esther, it's interesting because a lot of people have reached out to me um, since they've read the book, and they have told me stories that about things that have happened to them that they've never told anybody. And now, what I'm hoping is that people will get some, you know, maybe reach out and talk about this if it's not to a professional like a therapist or someone they trust, because I found out that holding that trauma inside is not good for you. You need
Mhm.
to get it out of your system. So I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me thanking me for talking about this, and then they've told me their story, and some of their stories have been doozies, I have to
Mhm.
say, which maybe much worse than what I went through. I mean, things that happened to them personally. And I thought they were so brave and courageous to talk about it. So yeah, I would say that it has run the gamut. There's always the people who still look like, react like he's some kind of a rock star. And that just I just I go, oh, really? No, he's not a rock star. He's
Yeah.
anything but that. But they're
Mhm.
just curious. I have to be not judgmental about that reaction either. People have
Right.
different reactions, and you just have to realize that this kind of news is something that people are very interested in.
Right. Yeah. And I think, with the media focus, especially now, like with the true crime genre becoming bigger and bigger. And also, I think with the Ted Bundy case, I mean, that's been from day one. I mean, this is one of the
And
first ones that everybody heard about. And it continues to be, in the media. Um, but I think that one of the things that I've noticed is that it's that I guess it's because of that it kind of blows it up into almost like an, an, a fictional, it's like a fictional character, like a Hannibal Lecter or something, instead of
yeah,
like a real person. And
yeah,
people kind of don't get it because it just seems like it's such a part of maybe like culture or something, or
pop
that,
culture. Yeah,
yeah,
and
that they
it's not
don't
really
take it
real. It's
right.
just a literary figure of some kind.
Yes.
But he's real. It's a real
Right.
person, and there's many, many people, many families that have been destroyed by his actions. And there's
Right.
still people out there that are suffering. Even
Yeah.
50 years later, I have a former roommate who that we were roommates after I graduated. I moved into a house that she was renting, and one of her best friends was one of his first victims. And
Hmm.
she understandably can't even talk about it to this day. That's how traumatic and how traumatized she was by this.
Right.
It was such a devastating blow to her and to her friend circle. And I've run into quite a few people that knew the victims. A lot of the victims that were around the University of Washington, I've run into quite a few people who've known one or the other of them, because it's a
Yeah.
relatively small community from that time.
Hmm. Well, it was so great talking to you. And I just want to again thank you for writing the book. I really think that one of the things that people will take away from this book is that the way that I did is that this is real. This was real. There was a
Mhm.
family involved. There was victims involved. There were their families involved, and this had these ripple effects. And so, maybe we can never, understand why, the whys of why this happened, but maybe just to have some compassion, and also to just kind of remember that there are real victims of this. Is a real, like you said, a real person who, created real devastation here. And the people around him as well, are all affected, even though you didn't know anything at the time, or it just continues. And
It
I would
does.
imagine even with your daughter, when she has children, I mean, this is part of their story,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. How do you handle that? She's going through that right now, trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to manage this. And now she learned, because I withheld a lot of things from her in order, thinking I was protecting her.
Mm-hmm.
And yet she was aware of what was going on. She was 12 when the execution was happening. And so it was wild. She was hearing everything in the media. And I've learned since, that's one of the things, one of the good things actually that's come out of me writing this book, is that it's really brought to attention what she went through at that time and how she couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Our family really went through a lot, just on our own level. Again,
Mm-hmm.
nothing like the victims' families, but it was pretty awful. And
Yeah.
so it's I think hearing from the family's point of view just gives somebody out there another perspective, that there are, like you said, we are all real people. We exist, and we
Yes.
have feelings.
Yes. So for that, I thank you, because and I will definitely encourage everyone to read the book. I'm actually really excited too, because your publisher was so kind to give me an extra copy. So I'll be letting listeners know at the end of this episode how they can get that copy.
Oh, that's
But
great.
of course, you could always go out and order it. I'm sure it's everywhere. It's Amazon and everywhere else. In your favorite independent bookstore is a great place to get her book. And if they don't have it, just tell them, they'll get it for you.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble has it too. And I mean, we actually, Amazon, I guess there were so many, they have temporarily run out, but they should have some in the next couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people are still fascinated by this, but I'm really glad they're going to be getting a different perspective, something that we haven't heard before. And like you said, really makes this real for people, because I think that's very, very important. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you, and I wish you the best of luck,
Thank you.
and healing for everybody, in the family, anybody affected. So thank you so much, Edna.
Thank you.
Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Edna Cowell Martin, for being on the show. You can find a link to purchase her book, Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy, in the show notes. If you'd like to win a copy, follow Once Upon a Crime on Instagram. Look for the post announcing the giveaway to enter and to win. Good luck! Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia. Next Monday, September 2nd, is a holiday in the U.S., so our next new episode will be released on September 9th. Join me then for a new series and all new true crime stories. Catch up on over 300 episodes in our back catalog, or hop on over to YouTube to watch our videos. Each video is a mini true crime documentary. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell while you're there. Just look for Once Upon a Crime podcast on YouTube or click on a link in the show notes. Until next time, be good to one another.